The development of forensic technology over the years has allowed detectives to solve cases from decades ago. The following 5 gruesome murders were rendered unsolvable for years, until DNA testing changed everything. First, Gail Barris, a 30-year-old single mother who worked 2 bartending jobs to support her 3 children, was found dead on River Road, violated and stabbed to death. On October 9, 1988, 2 weeks before her body was found, Gail was seen leaving Speed's coffee shop in Battle Creek, Michigan with a man. This was the last time Gail was ever seen alive before she mysteriously went missing. October 22nd, 3 days before her body was found by hunters who quickly altered law enforcement, the police confronted a 24-year-old man named Roger Plato, since his car matched the description of a separate abduction case. When Roger did not cooperate, the police pulled out their guns, only aggravating Roger. He tried to wrestle a gun out of a cop's hand and was promptly shot to death as a result. A blood sample was taken from Plato and stored in a private lab. The police involved with Gail's investigation put their focus onto Roger's friend and ex-roommate, a man with a lengthy criminal history named Richard Compton. Richard denied knowing anything, and for decades the case went cold. In 2018, Detective Scott Marshall reinvestigated the case. One of the first things she noticed was that Richard's DNA had never been tested, despite being the primary suspect. Richard had died in 2009, but that did not stop Detective Marshall, who was determined to solve the case. The detective had Richard's body dug up in order to collect a DNA sample. Although Richard's DNA did not match the DNA found on Gail's body, it did match unidentified hair connected to the crime scene. In November of 2020, Sergeant Chris Bacchick of the Calhoun County Sheriff's Department was taking note of the inventory at the station when he came across Roger's old blood sample. The blood sample was connected to the DNA found on Gail's body in January of 2021, over 30 years after Gail was murdered. Because both men had already passed away, the police were unable to bring them to justice. However, Gail's family was still grateful that her case had finally been solved. Second, Sylvia Mae Quayle, age 24, lives a peaceful life in Denver, Colorado. She was very close with her family and had coffee with her mother and father every morning. On August 4, 1981, her father, William Quayle, stopped Sylvia's house at 8 a.m. for the daily coffee, where he found her dead body laying naked on the living room floor, stabbed, shot, and strangled. Her bathroom window screen had torn off and thrown into the weeds. Sylvia had spoken to her sister on the phone the night before at 11 p.m., meaning her death occurred sometimes between then and when her father found her at 8 a.m. In 1983, forensic technicians used an alternate light source to find DNA that did not match Sylvia in the living room carpet. 2 years later, a portion of Sylvia's living room carpet was cut out and sent in to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation for testing. No match was found until January of 2021, when the DNA was connected to 22-year-old David Dwayne Anderson. One of the detectives, Robert Fuller, suspected David and secretly collected his DNA from a vanilla Coke can in David's trash. David, who had a criminal history of burglary from 1981 to 1986 and had once broken into a home by removing the window screen. On February 10, 2021, David was arrested at age 62 for the murder of Sylvia Mae Quayle. Third, Bonnie Baker. To celebrate her recent promotion at work, 47-year-old Bonnie Baker went out partying with her friends on June 30, 1988. While Bonnie was drinking and dancing with her friends, her boyfriend, Crespin Nene Perez, became enraged with jealousy, as he had been fired from the same workplace just a month earlier. As soon as he arrived at the party, high in illicit substances, he picked an argument with Bonnie. Bonnie left the party early with her boyfriend, telling her friends, "It would be better if I just go now, or it will be worse." Unfortunately for Bonnie, things did become worse. About 8 p.m. that same night, the police received an anonymous phone call claiming that a man had murdered a woman in an apartment and was about to drive to Mexico to dispose of the body in a red car with a Colorado license. The police investigated the apartment in Denver, Colorado, but found no signs of foul play. The next day, Crespin's car was involved in a crash near Glove, Arizona. Crespin had fled the scene, but detectives were able to collect blood from the trunk of his vehicle for evidence. A year later, on July 30th, 1999, two young men were horseback riding on Navajo tribal grounds in New Mexico, where they found a human skull. The two men called the police, who searched the area and came up with even more skeletal remains. Years later, on October 12, 2012, cold case detective Kenneth Klaus was assigned Bonnie's case. He called an FBI agent in New Mexico, asking that the bones found in the Navajo tribal grounds be sent into Denver's crime lab for forensic testing. The DNA of the bones matched Bonnie Baker. April 4, 2013, the anonymous caller came forward. The caller, whose relation to Bonnie was never publicly revealed, claimed she had cleaned Bonnie and her boyfriend's apartment before the detectives could show up to investigate. According to the woman, Crespin had told her, "I know that you don't like Bonnie. Something bad happened to us. You will never have to see Bonnie again because I am going to make her disappear." Soon after, a second witness came forward and identified Crespin as the driver of the red car found crashed all those years ago. After more and more witnesses came forward, a warrant for arrest was issued against Crespin. Crespin, who was living in Mexico, was finally extradited to Colorado in 2021, where he was charged with the abduction and murder of his girlfriend, Bonnie Baker. Fourth, Stephanie Summers. On August 30th, 1980, a woman named Stephanie Summers, age 36, had promised to take her 11-year-old nephew to Six Flags to celebrate his birthday, only to never show up. Soon after the authorities were altered, police found her body inside her apartment in Los Angeles, California. The case was left unsolved until 2014, when detectives obtained a new lead, a man named Harold Anthony Parkinson. On June 19th, police matched a DNA sample from Harold with DNA found on Stephanie's lifeless body. Harold only lived a mile away from Stephanie and was already in jail, serving a sentence of 15 years to life for murder. When the sister of Harold's murder victim learned he was being tried to a second murder, she testified against him in court. Harold's lawyer argued that Harold had not assaulted Stephanie, but rather had consensual sex with her just a couple days before her death, not realizing Stephanie was a lesbian. Judge Kathleen Kennedy described Stephanie's murder as a very degrading, horrible, violent crime. On February 14, 2021, Harold was sentenced to life in prison without any possibility of parole. Fifth and final, Annette Schnee and Bobby Joe Oberholzer. In Breckenridge, Colorado, 1982, the corpses of two different women were found miles apart from one another. Although the bodies were discovered 6 months apart, the detectives believed that both women were killed by the same perpetrator on the same night. Their reason for this was the fact that an orange sock was found at the scene of each crime. On January 6, 1982, Bobby Joe Oberholzer, age 29, hitchhiked home from work around 7:30 p.m. after having some drinks with her friends. Unfortunately for Bobby, she never made it home. Around midnight, her husband Jeff Oberholzer drove to Breckenridge to look for Bobby, but she was nowhere to be found. Worried sick, Jeff went to the police, but they turned him away, saying it was too early to file a missing persons report. The next morning, a farmer found Bobby's driver's license on his property 30 miles outside of Breckenridge. As Jeff and two of his friends drove to the farmer's house to pick up the license, they found her blue backpack in a snowy field. Inside the backpack was one of Bobby's gloves, splattered with blood. Jeff went into panic mode, and to his horror, Bobby's body was found 2 hours later, 15 miles from the location of the backpack. The only footprints found in the snow around Bobby's corpse were her own. Her wrists were tied together with a plastic cord, and a single orange sock laid near her. That same day, a second woman, Annette Schnee, age 21, was reported missing. Much like Bobby, Annette often hitchhiked home after work. Because of these similarities, it didn't take long for investigators to connect the two cases. The police questioned Jeff, asking him if he knew Annette. At first, Jeff denied ever knowing her, but after the police showed him a picture, he remembered meeting her once before when she was hitchhiking home and he gave her a ride. This made Jeff the primary suspect of both cases, although the police did not have enough evidence to convict him of either crime. On July 3, 1982, 6 months later, Annette's body was found 13 miles away from Bobby's body. At the scene of the crime, once again, was an orange sock. The police attempted to piece together what could have happened on January 6th. Annette was last seen in Breckenridge at about 4 p.m., talking to a dark-haired woman. Around 5 p.m., Annette left to catch a ride home as usual. The perpetrator, who police still believed was Jeff, picked her up and drove 20 miles south of Breckenridge. After driving her to a dead-end road, he sexually violated her in his vehicle. When putting her clothes back on, Annette missed putting on her second orange sock. Trying to escape her attacker, she fled the vehicle and was shot in the back while running away. The police theorized that later that night the perpetrator returned to Breckenridge, where he picked up Bobby, driving her 10 miles south of Breckenridge, and attempted to assault her. Bobby escaped from the car, where she was shot twice by her attacker. In the early 1990s, new information was shed upon the case, when DNA testing confirmed that the blood on the glove inside Bobbis's back pail came from a male, not Bobby. 30 years later, in the February of 2021, the DNA was matched with a man named Alan Lee Phillips, age 70. Alan is now being held without bail for kidnapping and assault with a deadly weapon.